Have you ever met someone who changed your life without saying a single word? Imagine struggling for years as a single father, believing every small miracle was just luck, until one ordinary afternoon, a billionaire walks into your life, asks one simple question, and unknowingly opens the door to a truth that had been hidden for years. Stay with this story, because what begins with an empty chair ends with a life-changing revelation that neither of them ever saw coming. Daniel's mornings always began before the sun came up. His small apartment was quiet, except for the soft sound of the coffee maker and the gentle footsteps of his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, getting ready for school. He packed her lunch with whatever he could afford, checked her homework one last time, and reminded her to keep smiling no matter what kind of day she had ahead. After dropping her off, he headed to a construction site where long hours and physical labor barely covered their monthly expenses. Since losing his wife several years earlier, every responsibility rested on his shoulders. There were days when exhaustion followed him like a shadow, but he never allowed Lily to see his worries. She believed her father could solve every problem, and Daniel wanted to protect that belief for as long as possible. On one rare afternoon, after finishing work earlier than expected, he stopped at a small neighborhood cafe to enjoy a quiet cup of coffee before picking Lily up from school. The cafe was unusually crowded, with every table occupied and customers waiting near the entrance. Daniel found one of the last available seats and spread Lily's math worksheets across the table, hoping to review them while he waited. Just as he lifted his coffee cup, a calm and confident voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can I sit with you?" He looked up and saw a well-dressed woman carrying a tray and scanning the packed room for an empty chair. Her appearance suggested success, but there was nothing demanding or arrogant in her expression. Daniel smiled politely and moved his papers aside. "Of course," he replied. She thanked him and sat across from him, placing her coffee on the table with a grateful smile. Neither of them realized this simple moment would become one of the most important meetings of their lives. Daniel had no idea that the woman sitting across from him was Victoria Hart, one of the country's most successful billionaires. To him, she was simply another customer looking for a place to enjoy her afternoon. Victoria, on the other hand, immediately noticed the worn backpack beside Daniel's chair, the carefully organized school papers, and the quiet determination in his eyes, sensing there was a story behind the ordinary man sitting across from her. As they waited for their coffee, the conversation unfolded naturally, without either of them trying to impress the other. Victoria asked if the school papers on the table belonged to Daniel's son, and he smiled before gently correcting her. "My daughter," he said proudly. "Her name is Lily, and she's the reason I get up every morning." There was a quiet confidence in his voice that caught Victoria's attention. He didn't speak like someone looking for sympathy. Instead, he spoke with gratitude, even though it was obvious life had demanded more from him than it had from most people. Curious about his story, Victoria listened as Daniel explained that he had been raising Lily alone since his wife passed away after a long illness. The hardest part wasn't only losing the woman he loved, but learning how to become both a father and a mother overnight. There were nights when he stayed awake worrying about bills, wondering how he would keep a roof over their heads while giving Lily the childhood she deserved. He admitted that many times he had come dangerously close to giving up hope, but somehow, whenever life became almost impossible, something unexpected always happened. Once a year, usually when financial pressure reached its worst point, an anonymous donation quietly appeared in his bank account. The amount was never extravagant, yet it always arrived at exactly the right moment. One year it covered Lily's school tuition after Daniel thought she might have to leave her private school. Another year it paid for emergency car repairs that allowed him to keep working. During another difficult season, the money arrived only days before rent was due, preventing them from losing their apartment. Daniel laughed softly as he admitted that he had stopped calling it luck, because it happened too many times to be a coincidence. He had visited the bank more than once, hoping to learn who the mysterious donor was, but every employee gave the same answer. The sender wished to remain completely anonymous. At first, Daniel spent months imagining who it could be. Maybe an old family friend, someone from his late wife's past, or even a stranger who had heard about their situation. Eventually, he accepted that he might never know. Instead of searching for a name, he simply promised himself that if life ever placed him in a position to help someone else, he would do it without expecting recognition, believing that the greatest kindness was often the kind that remained unseen. After leaving the cafe, Victoria found herself thinking about Daniel far more than she expected. She had attended countless business meetings with influential people, yet the conversation with a hard-working single father stayed in her mind. There had been no discussion about wealth, success, or social status. Daniel had spoken only about responsibility, hope, and the joy of watching his daughter grow into a kind person. His quiet strength reminded Victoria of why she had started giving back through her charitable foundation years ago. Unable to ignore her curiosity, she asked her trusted assistant to gather some background information about Daniel, not to invade his privacy, but to understand whether there was any way her foundation could support someone with such determination. A few days later, the assistant returned with a detailed report. It confirmed that Daniel had an excellent reputation wherever he worked. Every employer described him as honest, dependable, and willing to help others without complaint. Despite facing financial hardships, he had never applied for public assistance beyond what was absolutely necessary, and he had never asked anyone for special treatment. As Victoria continued reading, one particular file immediately caught her attention. It contained records from nearly a decade earlier, when her foundation had reviewed applications from families facing medical and financial emergencies. Among the documents was a letter written by Daniel's late wife, explaining their desperate situation during her illness. The words were simple, filled with love for her husband and daughter, rather than requests for pity. Attached to the letter was an approval, signed personally by Victoria herself, authorizing a private annual assistance fund for the family. Victoria stared at the signature for several moments before realizing what it meant. Years ago, she had quietly approved the donations and instructed her staff never to reveal the donor's identity. Over time, as thousands of other projects demanded her attention, she had completely forgotten about that single decision. Yet the payments had continued exactly as planned, arriving every year when Daniel needed them most. The anonymous support that had become a source of hope for Daniel and Lily had never come from a stranger, after all. It had come from the woman who had unknowingly shared a table with him in a crowded cafe, completely unaware that their lives had already been connected for years through one compassionate choice. Instead of revealing the truth immediately, Victoria chose to let their friendship grow naturally. Over the next several weeks, she returned to the neighborhood cafe whenever her schedule allowed, and each visit led to another meaningful conversation with Daniel. Sometimes Lily joined them after school, filling the table with stories about her classes, books, and dreams of becoming a teacher one day. Victoria admired the little girl's kindness and confidence, realizing those qualities reflected the love and guidance Daniel had given her despite every hardship. The more time Victoria spent with them, the more certain she became that Daniel had never measured life by money, but by the people he cared for. When her foundation's annual charity gala approached, she decided it was the right place to finally reveal the truth. She invited Daniel and Lily as special guests, though she simply described it as an evening celebrating community heroes. Daniel felt out of place the moment they arrived. The elegant ballroom was filled with business leaders, philanthropists, and well-known public figures, dressed in expensive formal wear. He quietly told Victoria that he probably didn't belong among people like them, but she smiled and assured him that he belonged there as much as anyone else. As the evening continued, Victoria stepped onto the stage to deliver the closing speech. She spoke about generosity, explaining that the greatest acts of kindness are often the ones performed without applause or recognition. She shared stories of families whose lives had been changed because someone chose to care in silence. Then she paused, looked toward Daniel, and invited him to join her before the audience. Confused but respectful, Daniel walked onto the stage while Lily watched from the front row. Victoria held up an old folder containing faded documents that had been preserved in the Foundation's archives. She explained that many years earlier, a heartfelt letter from a struggling young family had reached her desk, and after reading it, she personally approved an anonymous annual assistance fund to help them rebuild their lives. She slowly opened the folder and showed Daniel the letter written by his late wife. The moment he recognized her handwriting, emotion filled his face. Victoria gently admitted that she had been the anonymous donor all along, a truth she herself had only recently rediscovered after reviewing the Foundation's records. Daniel stood speechless, overwhelmed as years of unanswered questions suddenly found their answer before everyone in the room. For a long moment, the ballroom remained completely silent. Daniel looked at the letter in his hands, tracing the familiar handwriting of his late wife, as memories rushed back with overwhelming clarity. He remembered the nights they had spent worrying about hospital bills, the difficult conversations about how they would provide for Lily, and the quiet prayers they whispered when every solution seemed out of reach. He had never imagined that someone reading those words years earlier would quietly decide to carry part of their burden without ever asking for recognition. Looking up at Victoria, he struggled to find the right words. Finally, he offered a simple but heartfelt thank you, knowing that no speech could fully express what her unseen kindness had meant to his family. The audience responded with warm applause, not because of the money involved, but because they had witnessed the remarkable connection between two people whose lives had been linked by compassion long before they ever met face to face. After the event, Victoria and Daniel spent hours talking privately about the past, sharing stories they had never told anyone else. Victoria admitted that reviewing the old Foundation records reminded her why she had created the organization in the first place. Success had brought wealth and recognition, but helping families like Daniel's had always been the part of her work that gave her the greatest sense of purpose. Daniel explained how each anonymous donation had arrived at exactly the moment when hope seemed ready to disappear. Those timely gifts had allowed Lily to continue her education, helped him stay employed during difficult periods, and reminded him that goodness still existed even when life felt unfair. Inspired by Daniel's resilience and integrity, Victoria invited him to help lead several community housing and family support projects funded by her foundation. She believed that someone who had personally experienced hardship could understand struggling families in ways that no business executive ever could. Daniel accepted the opportunity with humility, determined to offer others the same encouragement that had quietly carried him through his darkest years. Lily watched the friendship between her father and Victoria grow stronger, learning that true generosity is measured not by public praise but by the willingness to lift another person without expecting anything in return. And she promised herself that wherever life eventually took her, she would always look for someone who needed hope and become that unexpected source of kindness in their life.